Welcome back, Rare Coin Insider. Imagine holding a small, seemingly ordinary coin in your hand, a coin so common that millions of people have passed it around without a second thought. Yet hidden within its copper surface lies a story that stretches across decades of American history, economics, and craftsmanship, and that coin is the 1-cent USA coin from 1980. A piece that at first glance looks like just another penny but carries details that collectors and enthusiasts obsess over with incredible passion, and as you look closer, you begin to notice that this coin is not just currency, it is a snapshot of a moment in time, a reflection of design choices, material changes, and minting techniques that define an entire era. The 1981 cent coin belongs to the long-running Lincoln Cent series, a series that began in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, making it one of the most recognizable coins in the United States. And by 1980, this design had already been circulating for over 70 years, yet it still retained its iconic look that millions instantly recognized, with the obverse side featuring the profile of Abraham Lincoln facing right, a design originally created by Victor David Brenner, whose initials, VDB, became a small but significant detail in the coin's history, and although those initials were controversial when first introduced, by 1980 they had become a subtle hallmark of authenticity and design heritage. When you examine the obverse more carefully, you see the word Liberty inscribed to the left of Lincoln's portrait, while the year 1980 appears to the right, and above his head, the national motto, "In God We Trust," curves along the rim. All of these elements combined in a balanced composition that has stood the test of time. And what's fascinating is how these inscriptions are not just decorative, they reflect the cultural and political identity of the United States during that period, making each coin a tiny historical document in metal form. Turning the coin over to the reverse side, you find the Lincoln Memorial, a design introduced in 1959 to replace the earlier wheat ears reverse, and this depiction of the memorial is incredibly detailed for such a small coin, showing the structure with fine lines, and even a tiny representation of Lincoln's statue seated inside, something that many people never notice unless they look very closely. And above the memorial, the inscription, "United States of America," arches along the top, while E pluribus unum appears just below it, and at the bottom, the denomination, 1 cent, is boldly displayed, reinforcing the coin's identity despite its modest value. Now when it comes to the physical characteristics, the 1981 cent coin has a weight of approximately 3.11 grams, and it is primarily composed of 95% copper and 5% zinc, a composition that was standard for pennies before the major change in 1982 when the U.S. Mint switched to a copper-plated zinc core due to rising copper prices. And this makes the 1980 penny particularly interesting because it represents one of the final years of the heavier, mostly copper pennies, giving it a different feel and density compared to modern pennies, something collectors often use to distinguish older coins from newer ones even without looking at the date. Another important aspect of the 1980 penny is the mint mark, which tells you where the coin was produced, and during the year, pennies were minted in 3 locations: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, with Philadelphia coins typically having no mint mark, Denver coins marked with a small d, and San Francisco coins marked with an s, and each of these mint marks can influence the coin's rarity and value depending on the number produced and the condition in which the coin has survived over the years. At first glance, you might think that a coin produced in such large quantities could never be rare or valuable, and in most cases, that assumption would be correct, because billions of 1980 pennies were minted, making them extremely common in circulation at the time. But this is where things start to get interesting, because not all coins are created equal, and certain variations, minting errors, or exceptionally well-preserved specimens can turn an ordinary penny into something far more valuable than its face value, sometimes even reaching astonishing prices in the collector's market. Collectors often look for coins in mint state condition, meaning they have never been circulated and retain their original luster, and a 1980 penny in such pristine condition can already be worth significantly more than 1 cent. But the real excitement comes from rare error coins, such as those with double dies, off-center strikes, or unusual metal compositions, and these errors can occur during the minting process, turning a common coin into a unique collectible that stands out from millions of others, and it is these rare variations that can push the value of a coin into the hundreds, thousands, or even much higher depending on the severity and uniqueness of the error. And then there are the stories, the rumors, and the collector legends that surround coins like the 1980 penny, stories of rare specimens being discovered in pocket change, or hidden away in old jars and collections, only to later be sold for incredible amounts of money, sometimes reaching values that seem almost unbelievable. And while a standard 1980 penny will never be worth anywhere near $150 million, the idea of hidden value and the thrill of the hunt is what keeps collectors searching, examining every detail under magnification, hoping to find that one extraordinary coin that defies expectations. As you continue to explore the world of this coin, you begin to realize that its true value is not just in its metal or its face value, but in its history, its design, and the stories it carries, and this is what transforms a simple piece of currency into a fascinating collectible, something that connects the past with the present in a way that few other objects can, and the deeper you go, the more layers you uncover, from the economic conditions that influenced its production to the tiny details that make each coin unique. As you dive deeper into the world of the 1981 cent coin, you begin to understand that the real fascination lies not in what is obvious, but in the subtle differences that most people overlook, and this is where collectors separate themselves from casual observers, because they train their eyes to notice the smallest imperfections, the tiniest shifts in design, and the rare anomalies that can completely change a coin's story and its value. And in the case of the 1980 penny, these details often revolve around minting errors, die variations, and condition grading, all of which play a crucial role in determining how much a coin is truly worth in the collector's market. One of the most sought-after features in coins, like the 1980 penny, is the presence of a double die error, a phenomenon that occurs when the coin die strikes the design more than once at slightly different angles, resulting in a noticeable doubling effect on letters, numbers, or design elements, and while not all doubling is significant enough to increase value, strong and clear double die errors can make a coin extremely desirable, especially when the doubling is visible to the naked eye, without magnification, and collectors often inspect areas like the date, 1980, the word, liberty, or the motto, "In God We Trust," for any signs of this effect. Another intriguing type of error is the off-center strike, where the coin is not properly aligned during the minting process, causing part of the design to be missing or shifted, and depending on how off-center the strike is, the coin can become quite valuable, especially if the date is still visible, because collectors prefer errors that are both dramatic and identifiable. And a well-preserved off-center 1980 penny can easily fetch a premium compared to a standard coin. There are also cases of clipped planchets, where a portion of the metal blank is missing before the coin is even struck, resulting in a coin with a curved or straight bite taken out of it, and while this might look like damage to an untrained eye, experienced collectors recognize it as a genuine mint error, and such pieces often carry a higher value due to their uniqueness and the fact that they escaped quality control at the mint. But beyond errors, condition plays an equally important role in determining value, and this is where grading comes into play, a system used by professionals to evaluate the quality of a coin based on factors like wear, luster, strike quality, and overall appearance, and coins are graded on a scale from poor to mint state, with mint state coins being the most desirable because they show no signs of circulation. And within mint state, there are even finer like MS-60, MS-65, or MS-70 each, representing a higher level of perfection, and a 1980 penny graded at MS-67 or higher can be worth significantly more than a circulated one, sometimes reaching impressive prices at auctions. The role of mint marks becomes even more interesting when you consider the production numbers for each mint, because while all three mints produced large quantities of pennies in 1980, slight differences in quality and survival rates can make certain mint mark coins more desirable than others. For example, San Francisco coins, often struck as proof coins, were made with special dyes and polished blanks to create a mirror-like finish, and these proof coins were never intended for circulation, making them highly attractive to collectors who value their sharp details and reflective surfaces. Proof coins from 1980, especially those with deep cameo contrast where the design appears frosted against a mirror-like background, can be particularly valuable, and when preserved in their original condition without scratches or blemishes, they become prized additions to any collection, often selling for much higher prices than regular circulation coins. And this highlights an important truth in coin collecting, which is that rarity is not just about how many coins were made, but how many have survived in excellent condition over time. Now, when it comes to the idea of a 1980 penny being worth $150 million, it's important to approach this claim with a realistic perspective, because while it makes for an exciting and attention-grabbing statement, there is no verified record of any 1981 cent coin reaching anywhere near that value. Even the rarest pennies in history, such as the famous 1943 copper penny, have sold for hundreds of thousands or even over $1 million, but not tens of millions, let alone 150 million. And this means that such claims are often exaggerated or based on misinformation, yet they continue to circulate because they capture the imagination of people who dream of finding hidden treasure in everyday objects. However, this does not mean that the 1980 penny has no significant value, because certain rare examples, especially those with unique errors or in near-perfect condition, can still be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars, and for collectors, the thrill lies in discovering these rare pieces, in carefully examining each coin, and in understanding the factors that contribute to its value, from its metal composition to its minting history and beyond. Another fascinating aspect of the 1980 penny is its place in the broader timeline of U.S. coinage, because it was produced during a period of economic change when the rising cost of copper was forcing the U.S. Mint to reconsider the composition of its coins, and just 2 years later, in 1982, the transition to copper-plated zinc pennies would mark the end of an era, making pre-1982 pennies, like the 1980 version, a kind of last generation of heavier copper coins, something that adds an extra layer of historical significance for collectors and historians alike. As you continue exploring, you begin to see how a single coin can open the door to an entire world of knowledge, from metallurgy and economics to art and history, and the 1981 cent coin becomes more than just a piece of currency. It becomes a gateway into understanding how something so small can carry so much meaning, and why people dedicate their time and passion to collecting, studying, and preserving these tiny pieces of the past. When you move further into the collector's perspective of the 1980 USA 1 cent coin, the discussion naturally shifts from physical characteristics and minting errors toward the real driving force of coin value in the modern market: demand, scarcity perception, and collector psychology, because coins do not gain value only from metal content or age. They gain value when people believe they are worth preserving, trading, and competing for. And that is where the story of the 1980 penny becomes even more interesting in a global collecting environment. In today's numismatic market, the 1980 penny sits in a very unusual position, because it is both extremely common in circulation history and yet still actively collected by beginners and serious enthusiasts, meaning it exists in what experts call a high survival but low baseline value category, where millions still exist but only a small fraction are preserved in high-grade condition, and that small fraction is where real money begins to appear, especially when grading services certify them with professional authentication and assign numerical quality scores. Grading companies such as PCGS and NGC play a major role in shaping the value of coins like the 1980 cent, because without certification, even a potentially high-quality coin may be dismissed as ordinary, but once sealed and graded, its value becomes standardized and internationally recognized, and this is where things become important for collectors aiming to understand market pricing, because a raw 1980 penny might sell for a few cents to a few dollars depending on condition, but a certified mint state example with strong luster and sharp strike can reach significantly higher levels in auctions or private sales. Now, when we talk about the coin's design in deeper detail, there is something very important that often goes unnoticed by casual observers, and that is how the Lincoln portrait itself evolved over decades of minting, because even though the design remained consistent, the quality of strikes vary from year to year depending on die wear, mint technology, and production pressure, and in 1980, the U.S. Mint was producing coins at extremely high volumes, which sometimes resulted in weaker strikes or minor inconsistencies, and ironically, these imperfections can sometimes create collectible varieties that experienced numismatists actively seek out. The reverse design, featuring the Lincoln Memorial, also holds hidden layers of interest because the level of detail in the columns, steps, and statue inside the memorial can vary depending on how fresh the die was when the coin was struck, and early die strikes often show sharper architectural detail, while later strikes may appear slightly softened. And collectors who specialize in Lincoln cents often categorize coins based on these subtle differences, building entire collections focused not just on dates, but on strike quality variations across the same year. Another important aspect that influences value is the concept of population reports, which are statistical records maintained by grading companies that show how many coins of a specific type and grade have been certified. And for a common coin like the 1980 penny, it is expected that high-grade examples exist, but the number sharply decreases as you move into top-tier grades like MS67, MS68, or higher, and this rarity within condition, rather than rarity of production, is what creates meaningful collector premiums in the modern market. Market activity for the 1980 penny also varies depending on auction platforms and collector trends, because sometimes interest spikes when online videos or viral claims exaggerate values, leading new collectors to search through their change hoping to find a rare piece. And while most of these searches result in ordinary coins, the psychological appeal of hidden treasure in everyday money keeps the demand alive, and that demand itself supports a stable collector market even for common date coins. Now, addressing the exaggerated idea of a $150 million valuation, it is important to understand how such numbers typically arise, because they are often the result of misinformation, misinterpretation of rare coin auctions, or intentional clickbait content, and in professional numismatics, valuations at that extreme level simply do not exist for any modern Lincoln cent, including the 1980 issue, and even the most legendary U.S. coins in history rarely exceed a few $1,000,000 under extraordinary circumstances, meaning the 150 million figure belongs more to internet myth than to verified auction reality. However, this does not reduce the educational or collectible importance of the 1980 penny, because its true value lies in its role as a transitional era coin, produced just before a major composition change in 1982, and this makes it part of the final phase of traditional copper cent production, something that gives it historical relevance even if not extreme monetary value. And collectors often appreciate these transitional pieces, as part of a complete timeline rather than isolated high-value artifacts. There is also an interesting global aspect to the collecting of U.S. pennies, because American coinage is widely collected outside the United States, especially in countries like Pakistan, India, Europe, and parts of the Middle East, where collectors are fascinated by U.S. history and minting quality, and coins like the 1980 cent often enter international markets through trade, online auctions, and inherited collections, further expanding their reach beyond domestic circulation. At this stage, when you fully understand the 1980 penny, you begin to see that its importance is not in becoming a million-dollar rarity, but in being part of a much larger ecosystem of numismatics, where every coin contributes to a story of economic evolution, design consistency, and collector passion, and even a simple one-cent piece can open discussions about metallurgy, grading science, historical transitions, and market psychology, all wrapped into something small enough to fit in your hand yet rich enough to study for hours. And as we continue further, the next part will explore how collectors actually search for valuable 1980 pennies in real life, what tools they use, what signs they look for, and how ordinary people sometimes accidentally discover coins worth far more than they expected. When collectors and enthusiasts actively search for coins like the 1980 USA 1-cent piece, the process is far more detailed than simply checking the date and hoping for luck, because experienced collectors follow a systematic approach that involves inspection, categorization, comparison, and sometimes even magnification tools. And this is where coin collecting transforms from a casual hobby into a serious analytical practice that blends history, precision, and patience. The first thing collectors usually do is sort coins by year and mint mark, because separating a large batch of pennies into individual years helps identify which coins are worth further inspection, and once 1980 pennies are isolated, the next step is examining the condition of each coin under good lighting, because lighting reveals surface quality, scratches, luster, and strike sharpness, all of which play a role in determining whether a coin is ordinary circulation quality or something closer to mint state preservation. After that, collectors often use magnification tools such as jeweler's loupes or digital microscopes, because many of the valuable features on coins, like the 1980 cent, are not visible to the naked eye, and under magnification, they carefully inspect the date area, lettering, and Lincoln's portrait for signs of doubling, die cracks, or misalignment. And even the smallest anomaly can sometimes shift a coin from common to collectible. Another key technique is comparing multiple coins side by side, because subtle differences in strike strength or die wear become more obvious when you have a reference group, and this comparative method is especially important for identifying high-quality strikes or proof-like surfaces, which may not be immediately noticeable when viewing a single coin in isolation. Collectors also pay attention to the edge and rim of the coin, because irregularities such as weak rims, clipping, or uneven metal flow can indicate minting errors, and while these details might seem minor, they are often the exact features that separate a standard coin from a valuable error specimen, and experienced numismatists train themselves to notice these imperfections quickly. In modern collecting culture, online marketplaces and auction platforms have also become major sources for finding and trading coins like the 1980 penny, and collectors frequently browse listings to compare prices, verify authenticity, and track market trends, because the value of coins can fluctuate based on demand, rarity perception, and newly discovered varieties, making the market dynamic rather than fixed. There is also an educational aspect that cannot be ignored, because many collectors begin their journey with simple coins like the 1980 cent and gradually develop deeper knowledge of U.S. coinage history, learning about minting processes, metal compositions, historical design changes, and grading standards, and over time, what started as a curiosity often becomes a lifelong passion or even a professional pursuit in numismatics. Now, When it comes to real-world value expectations, it is important to separate fact from fiction clearly, because while sensational claims like $150 million circulate online and attract attention, the actual verified market values for 1980 pennies are far more grounded, with typical circulated coins remaining at face value, uncirculated examples reaching a few dollars to perhaps higher in certified grades, and rare error coins occasionally reaching more significant but still realistic collector prices, depending entirely on rarity, condition, and demand. The truth is that the real value of the 1980 penny is not found in unrealistic jackpot expectations, but in its role as a collectible artifact that connects everyday life with historical continuity, because every coin produced in that year passed through the hands of the U.S. Mint during a specific economic era, and each one carries identical design intent, yet unique microscopic differences that make each specimen slightly different from another, and that uniqueness is what collectors truly appreciate. In the end, the 1980 USA 1-cent coin stands as a reminder that value is not always obvious at first glance, because what looks like a simple piece of copper can actually represent decades of minting tradition, design evolution, and collector fascination, and while it may not hold mythical million-dollar status, it holds something arguably more meaningful for enthusiasts, a tangible link to history that anyone can hold in their hand. And so, as you look at a 1980 penny again, you no longer see just a 1-cent coin, but a carefully engineered artifact of American minting history, a small but powerful symbol of economic change, and a gateway into the vast and fascinating world of numismatics, where even the smallest details can tell the biggest stories.